Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. Tonight's case opens in a quiet drawing room where a single glass of sherry gleams in the lamplight, its sweetness masking a bitter truth. When a gentleman collapses after the final sip, suspicion swirls among the polished decanters and hushed conversations. For in that glass lies not only poison, but also a secret someone was desperate to keep. Before the mystery starts, let your thoughts wander. Sometimes the mind finds answers where the eyes do not. Where in the world are you joining us from? If you're ready for another case, show your support and become part of our mystery-loving community. Now, light a candle, settle in, and let the mystery begin. I was on the red leather chair in the office, doing what any honest working man does at 11:43 on a Monday morning, resting from the strain of breakfast. I had one ankle on the desk corner and the Gazette on my lap, scanning the latest social foibles dressed up as crime. Wolfe, of course, was buried in the Orchid Growers' Review, which meant the silence was golden, humid, and almost unbearable. Then the doorbell rang. I waited. Fritz usually got it on the first bounce, but after a second chime, I tossed the paper and went to the front. When I opened it, the woman standing there looked like she hadn't slept in a week, and not because she was out dancing. She was about 30, buttoned in tweed like it was armor. Short hair, storm gray eyes, and a handbag that screamed uptown but looked like it had been dragged through a downtown gutter. She glanced past me like she was measuring the hallway for exits. "Miss?" I offered, trying the smile that says, "I'm charming until I'm not." "Judith Lamont," she said. "I was told you handle problems. Private ones." "That's a generous description," I said. "Come in. If your problem involves a missing husband, a forged will, or an ugly little secret pretending to be a family heirloom, you're in the right place." She followed me in without a word. I motioned to the client chair in Wolfe's office and buzzed him. He didn't answer, which meant he was deciding whether Judith's arrival was worth finishing the paragraph. She sat stiffly, scanning the room like she'd walked into a courtroom by mistake. 5 minutes later, Wolfe entered, heavy and precise, like a verdict. He moved behind his desk and sat without a nod to her or me, folded his hands on the blotter, and stared. "You are Miss Lamont?" he asked finally. "Yes." "You require a service?" "I need someone who will not panic, and who can tell the difference between a misunderstanding and malice." "That eliminates 90% of the population," Wolfe murmured. "Mr. Goodwin, fetch her a glass of water." "She looks more parched than persuasive," I complied. She took a sip, but didn't relax. Some clients warmed to the brownstone's curious luxury, but she looked like every orchid in the room made her itch. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Proceed." "There's been a poisoning," she said. "Not fatal. Not reported. But deliberate." I raised a brow. "A week ago, during a small dinner at my father's apartment, he became violently ill after one glass of sherry. The doctor assumed a reaction. He's had health scares. But he recovered, and we thought that was it." Wolfe's eyelids fluttered like shutters in a weak breeze. "But last night," she continued, "I found something odd." The cabinet where he keeps the sherry was disturbed. A small bottle, labeled ammonium phosphate of all things, was tucked behind the decanter. I took it home and called his physician anonymously. He confirmed it would cause exactly the symptoms my father had. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "Have you informed the police?" "No, I can't." "Why not?" She hesitated. "My father is Harlan Lamont." That got Wolfe's interest. Lamont was a name with gravitas, a philanthropist with just enough scandal in his past to keep the society pages from getting bored. "And he would rather die of something else than embarrassment," I said dryly. She nodded. "Is he aware of your suspicion?" Wolfe asked. "No. He's already dismissed it. He thinks someone accidentally swapped the bottle or that the housekeeper, who drinks, was careless." "And you think otherwise?" "I know otherwise," she said tightly. "The sherry was served to him by someone who knew what they were doing." Wolfe closed his eyes again. I'm offering you $5,000 for discretion. I don't want an arrest or headlines. I want to know who did it and why. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me. Archie. Yes, sir? Take down the names of everyone present at that dinner and inquire about the vintage of the sherry. I pulled my notebook. Shoot. There were 5 of us, she began. My father, myself, his business manager, a woman named Flora Kilgallen, she's a family friend, and Emery Bain, an attorney who's been sniffing around our estate holdings. Sniffing? I asked. He's been advising my father to make certain adjustments. Adjustments of the monetary kind? I asked. Yes, he's very persuasive and persistent. I jotted the names. The business manager, Lawrence Delholme. Efficient, distant, and never speaks unless it's about spreadsheets. Wolfe snorted softly. A man after my own heart. What about staff? I asked. Only Lorna, our cook and housekeeper. She's been with us for 15 years. Her memory is going, but she wouldn't harm a soul. Wolfe stood abruptly, an odd signal, and walked toward the bookshelves, his hands behind his back. I will consider this, he said. Return tomorrow at 11. She stood slowly, uncertain. So you'll take the case? I said I will consider it. I require 24 hours to digest your sherry. She frowned. You mean the story? I mean both. He gestured. I showed her out. On the doorstep, she turned to me. I know you must think it's ridiculous, she said, but I know what I saw. Someone tried to poison him, and it wasn't a mistake. I believe you, I said. And if Wolfe doesn't, give me 1 day and a polite nudge. He never likes to say yes immediately. It cheapens the mystery. She left, and I shut the door. Back inside, Wolfe had returned to his chair. Well? I asked. Well, he said, she's either genuinely disturbed by a subtle attempt at murder, or she's the one who poured the sherry. I whistled low. I admit, he continued, I am intrigued. Not by the event, but by her tone. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to look up Flora Kilgallen, Delholme, and Mr. Persuasive? Yes. Begin with Emery Bain. And if I find anything? He leaned back, reached for the bell, and summoned Fritz. If you find anything, Archie, I may consider lifting a finger. Perhaps even too miraculous, I muttered, heading for my coat. But Wolfe's eyes were open now, and the case, whether or not he'd admit it, had already crossed the brownstone threshold. By 3:15 that afternoon, I was downtown in a second-floor office that smelled like varnished wood and stale ambition. Emery Bain had picked a good address, close enough to Wall Street for power lunches, far enough for plausible deniability. The receptionist was glossy in the way law firm gatekeepers tend to be. Sharp lips, sharper nails, and an expression that said, appointments only. I gave her the grin and the card. Nero Wolfe's office, I said. Mr. Buzz, Bain might be interested. She took the card with 2 fingers like it was a strange playing piece, disappeared into a side door, and returned half a minute later with a practiced smile. He'll see you now. The office was dim and aggressively well furnished, mahogany, brass, and a reproduction of something British and miserable hanging on the far wall. Emery Bain rose from behind the desk with a smile that should have been registered as a performance. Tall, rail-thin, hair too perfect for a man over 45, and a handshake like a curtain call. Mr. Goodwin, he said, voice polished to a courtroom gleam. Is this visit about business or curiosity? Depends, I said. Do you often poison your client's sherry, or was this a one-time experiment? His smile didn't even twitch. That must be a joke. Must be, I said. Miss Lamont seems to think it's more of a felony. He moved to a side table and poured himself a drink. Iced tea, unless bourbon had learned new tricks. I'm fond of Harlan Lamont, he said. I've been advising him for almost a year. If someone tried to hurt him, I'd want them caught. Wouldn't we all? He took a sip, studied me over the rim. But Judith has always been intense, bright but emotional. She's also been quite vocal about opposing the structural changes I've recommended to the Lamont Trust. Meaning? He waved a hand. Harlan's assets are vast but misaligned. I suggested some consolidations, moving art, adjusting overseas shares, and sunsetting some of the real estate holdings I leaned against the wall. And Judith didn't like that. She accused me, privately of course, of manipulation, said I was grooming her father for control. I can assure you, Mr. Goodwin, I don't need to poison Sherry to secure my retainer. That's good to know. Where were you sitting at this dinner? To Harlan's right, Judith across, Delholme and Flora flanking. Why? Because whoever poured the drinks may have had more control than you're letting on. He shrugged. Harlan poured them himself. It's his habit. He doesn't trust staff with his liquor. That tracked. I'd read that in a society column years ago. Harlan Lamont's signature pour, they'd called it, like it was a magic trick. So unless Harlan poisoned himself, Bain said, the substance must have been introduced beforehand. And you don't find that convenient? Convenient, yes. Incriminating? Number. If I'd wanted to poison him, Archie, I wouldn't have done it over roast duck and small talk. He said it too smoothly, too rehearsed, the kind of line you polish in the mirror just in case someone like me shows up asking questions. I left 5 minutes later with nothing concrete but a feeling. Emery Bain smiled too often. He agreed too easily. And Judith's comment about him sniffing around hadn't been poetic license. The guy was up to something. Whether it involved Sherry or not was still murky. Back at the brownstone, I reported in. He claimed Harlan poured the drinks himself, I said, dropping into the red chair again. Wolfe grunted from behind the Atlantic Monthly, but that was the closest thing he ever gave to encouragement. And Bain admits to making power plays about the estate. Judith objected. She thinks he's trying to gain influence. Influence is not criminal, Wolfe said. No, but it makes a motive. Especially if she's seen him scheming. You think she planted the ammonium phosphate herself? I think it was planted, Wolfe said. Whether by Miss Lement or another party remains to be seen. Want Saul on Bain? Not yet. Begin with Delholme. Quiet men are often better at secrets than the ones who perform. I nodded. You expect he'll talk? Only if you bore him, Wolfe said, folding the magazine and ringing for Fritz. Now please, Archie, dinner must be in an hour, and if Fritz prepared the halibut as instructed, I require peace to contemplate it. I let him be. The next morning I made the pilgrimage to Le Mans, building on East 67th. Marble foyer, board doorman, and a scent of cold polish everywhere. Lawrence Delholme's office was 1 floor above the Lamont residence. Harlan had kept him close. The guy looked like he belonged in a museum. Thin spectacles, a narrow face, and the kind of stillness that said he had files older than most marriages. I'm not sure what I can tell you, he said. I wasn't watching the drinks. But you were at the dinner. Yes. Anything strange? He hesitated. Flora Kilgallen left the table briefly before dessert. Claimed she needed her inhaler. Where was it? She said it was in her coat, hanging in the vestibule. You think that matters? I don't presume, Delholme said. I observe. And what did you observe about Bain? That he believes he is the smartest man in any room, and that he smiles more when Judith is silent. That was the second person to mention Bain's grin. I filed it away. What about Lorna, the housekeeper? Loyal. Fading. The kind of woman who remembers how things smelled 30 years ago, but forgets her tea kettle. Could she have mixed something into the bottle? Only if she mistook poison for pepper. He looked at me, expression dry. Miss Lamont is worried, I said. She always has been. Since her mother died. Were they close? Delholme's voice went a note quieter. She was very much like her mother. Protective, suspicious, not always wrong. I left him in his pool of sunlight and dust. He hadn't given me anything definite, but something in his eyes when he mentioned Flora Kilgallen had flickered. Not fear, not malice, but recognition. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe mid-sip of beer and munching radishes. He looked up with the tolerance of a man interrupted during a religious rite. "Well," he said, "Delholme says Flora left the room during dinner, claimed she needed her inhaler, and the cabinet was tampered with." "Could be. Did she return with any signs of distress?" "No one mentioned any wheezing." Wolfe chewed a radish stem. "Then that is the first fracture." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Wolfe said, "that if the sherry was spiked before the pour, someone had to access the cabinet beforehand. Judith claims the poison bottle was behind the decanter, which would suggest tampering after the pour." "Precisely. So why would Miss Kilgallen return to the vestibule?" "Opportunity," I said. "Or performance," Wolfe replied. He stood, slowly, a heavy rising of thought. "Tomorrow," he said, "we shall receive Miss Kilgallen. And if her smile is as telling as Mr. Baines, I shall begin to suspect the truth has nothing to do with sherry at all." The next morning arrived with drizzle and a sense of anticipation. That meant no sidewalk loafing and fewer excuses for Fritz to complain about the umbrella. Stand at precisely 11, as promised, or perhaps summoned. Flora Kilgallen arrived at the brownstone in a burgundy raincoat, a matching hat, and gloves that looked like they hadn't been bought so much as inherited. Velvet, deep plum, probably from the era when people still called on neighbors for brandy at 4. I let her in. She was the sort of woman who made every motion deliberately, stepping through the door like a ballerina avoiding scuffed tiles, glancing around like she'd been here once in another life. Wolfe didn't rise to greet her, naturally, but I did the honors and led her to the red chair across from his desk. "Miss Kilgallen," I said, "this is Nero Wolfe. You're in his sanctum now, so no sudden moves, no talk of low-fat diets, and no references to horoscopes." She smiled like a cat that had just heard the can opener. "I've been warned," she said, voice smooth and precise, "but not about the charm." Wolfe didn't smile. He never does when a woman enters with compliments before confessions. "Miss Kilgallen," he said, "Mr. Goodwin will record this interview. You are here in connection to an incident involving Harlan Lamont, your host and friend." "Of course." "You were present during the dinner in question?" "Yes." "You consumed the same wine?" "Sherry." "Yes." "A 1968 Amontillado. Pale, dry, a bit overkept, if you ask me." "That bottle," Wolfe said, "is now under suspicion." "Your friend fell ill after consuming one glass." She crossed her legs slowly. The gloves didn't come off. I heard. But I assumed it was his usual theatrics. Harlan often dramatizes his ailments. "You left the table during the meal." Her smile dipped half an inch. "To retrieve my inhaler." "You returned without using it." "I didn't need it." The air had cleared. I raised an eyebrow. "What air?" There was an oil candle on the sideboard. It gave off a scent I found cloying. Harlan's new housekeeper must have lit it. No candle was seen or reported by the others, I said. "Well, that's curious," she said with a lift of one perfectly plucked brow. Wolfe sat motionless, studying her face as if cataloguing it. "You were near the liquor cabinet during this detour?" he asked. "I walked through the vestibule." "Yes. But I didn't touch anything. Did you see anyone else there?" "No, it was empty." "Do you recall the position of the sherry bottle?" She tilted her head, thinking. "Front left. Why?" "It was later found with a second bottle, hidden behind it." I didn't notice any second bottle. Her voice didn't flicker. Her tone held. But there was a slight pressure in the way she folded her gloved hands now. A contained tremor, maybe, or the echo of one. "Miss Lamont believes someone deliberately tampered with the sherry," Wolfe said, "with intent to harm her father." Flora gave a tiny laugh. "Judith sees villains in every teacup. I'm surprised she didn't accuse the waiter of espionage." "There was no waiter," Wolfe said sharply. She hesitated just a breath too long. "Yes," she said, recovering. "I meant metaphorically." I tapped my pen against the edge of the desk. Metaphorically, it's a nice place to hide. But this poison wasn't a poetic gesture. She looked at me, her smile returning. You think I poisoned Harlan? Over what? That's what we're trying to learn, Wolfe said. Your presence here was not demanded. You volunteered to clear the air, she said. And because I respect Harlan, even if I don't adore his daughter. You and Miss Lamont are at odds. She believes I'm too close to her father. I believe she's too far from reason. That's hardly a motive for poison. No, Wolfe said, but it is a motive for drama, especially if one seeks control, leverage, or distraction. She stood slowly, brushing an invisible wrinkle from her glove. If you're accusing me, do it directly. I'm not accusing, Wolfe said. I'm observing and questioning. You may go. She looked startled. People rarely get dismissed by Wolfe before they've fully framed their alibi. Very well, she said. But if you find that bottle's fingerprints match mine, I'll eat my own gloves. Please don't, I said. They look expensive. She left, and I turned to Wolfe, who had already resumed his seat and closed his eyes. Well, I asked. She lied twice, he said. About the candle and the bottle? Yes, there was no scented candle. Mr. Delholme would have noted it. He is sensitive to smell, and she described the position of the sherry bottle without being prompted. I noticed that, I said. She placed it before we asked. She volunteered details as camouflage, Wolfe murmured. Which raises the question, why misdirect at all unless the truth is worse? Jealousy? I asked. Maybe she's nursing some private bitterness. Or, Wolfe said, she's protecting someone. That froze me. Protecting who? That is the question you shall pursue. Begin with a housekeeper, Lorna. Yes, she may recall more than she understands. And check the bottle. If she cleaned, she may have moved it, accidentally or otherwise. I'm on it. I called Saul first, asked him to do a quiet check on Flora Kilgallen, past jobs, old affiliations, former addresses. If she'd ever bought fertilizer or chemical-grade anything, he'd find it. Then I made the hike back to the Lamont residence and tracked down Lorna. She opened the door in slippers and a cardigan older than my lease. Miss Lamont said you'd be coming, she said, leading me inside with a slow shuffle. She said you had questions about the dinner. Only a few, I said. That night after Mr. Lamont got sick. Did you clean the dining room? Of course. Did you touch the liquor cabinet? Just dusted the shelf. Didn't touch the bottles. Did anyone go back there before dessert? She thought. Miss Kilgallen went to get her inhaler. Did she go into the cabinet? She passed by it. Did she say anything? Act strangely? No, but... She stopped, brow furrowing. She had gloves on. Yes, but she took them off before dinner. I put them with the coats. I felt the click. You're sure? She asked for them back before dessert. Said her hands were cold. That did it. Back at the brownstone, I told Wolfe. She got her gloves back, I said, before she left the table. Wolfe opened his eyes. And the gloves could conceal residue, protect prints, prevent smudges. Exactly. Then our Miss Kilgallen, he said, is more than a dinner guest with taste in sherry. She's a woman who prepared for an act. He looked toward the ceiling. Call Judith Lamont. Have her here tomorrow at 10. Then summon all the others, the suspects. The guests, Wolfe said. Let us call them what they were, witnesses to a performance. It's time we opened the curtain. It was just past 9:40 the following morning when I stepped into Wolfe's office and gave him the nod. She's here. With bells on, Wolfe didn't look up from the morning's mail. You mean Miss Lamont? I do. She brought her father's temper and her own sense of urgency. Also, a scarf that looks like it could strangle a man. He made a noise that could have been amusement or indigestion. Fritz let her in a moment later, and Judith entered briskly, eyes sharper than the first cup of coffee. She wasn't interested in pleasantries, not today. "You've found something," she said, before even sitting down. Wolfe inclined his head. "We have found inconsistencies." And behavior unsuited to innocence. Judith glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. "And you believe it was Flora?" "I have not said so." "But you think it?" Wolfe gestured toward the chair across from him, and she sat, perched, really, like a hawk ready to dive. "We are assembling the dinner guests here at noon," Wolfe said. "I expect you to attend. As a witness, possibly as more." That made her blink. "What does that mean?" "It means," I cut in, "you may need to answer for more than just observations." Wolfe doesn't like questions with only one layer. She crossed her arms. "I haven't lied." "No," Wolfe said mildly, "but you have chosen what not to say with remarkable care." Before she could respond, the phone buzzed. I answered. Saul's voice came through low and steady. "Your lady in gloves has a background," he said. "Nothing criminal, but her name came up in a sealed probate case 3 years ago, Manhattan Surrogate's Court. She was the executor of an old friend who left her everything, except a controlling family contested it. Turns out the will had been updated weeks before the man died. Suspicious? Let's say she walked away with 2 properties, a portfolio of wine, and a court's grudging blessing. The new will was upheld, but barely. Name of the deceased: Peter Van Reems, banker, widowed, old enough to need a cane and too rich to use one without checking the leather handle first. Any overlap with Harlan Lamont? None obvious, but she's played this role before. Companion, executor, inheritor. Thanks, Saul. I relayed this to Wolfe as Judith sat stone still. Her lips thinned with each word. "She's a fraud," she said finally. "A patient one." "Possibly," Wolfe said. "But if so, she's not foolish. Poison is noise, and Miss Kilgallen does not enjoy noise." That led us into silence again, which Fritz broke by wheeling in the breakfast tray. Wolfe dismissed us both and instructed me to begin seating the parties in the front room by 1:45. So I did. First to arrive was Delholm, as punctual as a Swiss watch with a moral compass. He looked neither amused nor disturbed, just alert, like he was balancing spreadsheets in his head. Then came Emery Bain, grinning as usual, his umbrella curved over one arm like a rapier he hadn't yet unsheathed. Flora Kilgallen was last, of course. Never arrived too early for Judgment Day. She wore a navy ensemble that looked designed to whisper innocent to jurors and wolves alike. No gloves this time. That told me something, even if it didn't tell me enough. At noon sharp, Wolfe entered and seated himself with the gravity of a trial judge. "Thank you all," he said, without looking thankful. "I've summoned you here to clarify events surrounding the illness of Mr. Harlan Lamont. While the man himself is not present, his interests are represented by Miss Lamont." Judith sat beside me, spine like a steel rod. Bain, across from her, lounged as if waiting for someone to bring him popcorn. "Mr. Lamont," Wolfe continued, "was poisoned. The substance was ammonium phosphate, a compound used in fertilizers, capable of inducing symptoms identical to those he experienced. It was introduced, likely, to his glass of sherry." No one gasped, but I watched their faces carefully. Delholm lowered his gaze slightly. Bain did a slow blink. Flora reached for the water glass on the side table but didn't drink. "We have learned," Wolfe said, "that one guest left the table before dessert. Miss Kilgallen." "I've already explained," she said coolly. "I needed my inhaler, which you did not use." The air had cleared. "You were seen near the liquor cabinet," I added. "I walked through the vestibule." "That's not a crime." "Nor is it innocence," Wolfe said. "You also wore gloves. Velvet. Elegant, concealing, and easily removed before sitting again. According to the housekeeper, you reclaimed those gloves before dessert. which is when the bottle was later found to be repositioned, with a smaller container hidden behind it. Flora met his gaze. No denial, no confession. "You have played this game before," Wolfe said. "In the Van Reems case, executor to a man whose family disputed your influence. The court ruled in your favor, but not without suspicion. I was a companion to Peter," she said quietly. "He trusted me. That's not a crime either, but using charm to acquire control is a strategy," Wolfe said, "and you employed it again with Harlan Lamont." "That's not true." Bain stirred. "Actually, I warned Harlan about her," he said. "Last month, I told him she was more interested in his ledger than his legacy." "You didn't," Judith shot back. "You warned me." And I listened. Wolfe raised a hand, and the room went quiet. "I do not accuse blindly," he said, "but motives cluster. Miss Kilgallen had access, opportunity, and pattern. Mr. Bain, you had financial ambition. Mr. Delholme, you knew more than you shared, but you feared entanglement." Delholme blinked. "I knew she was playing a long game, but I didn't know how long, and Miss Lement." Wolfe turned his head. "You saw all this, yet waited." She bristled. "Because I didn't want to push my father. If I had confronted him, he'd have defended her. He always sides with the charming ones." "Then you allowed the dinner to unfold," Wolfe said, "knowing it might expose someone." She said nothing, but the silence was enough. "Miss Kilgallen," Wolfe said, folding his hands, "I suggest you consider legal counsel. No formal charge has been made, yet. But should the bottle produce evidence, I assure you I will not hesitate." She didn't answer, but her throat moved once, like a swallowed scream. "I believe this concludes our gathering," Wolfe said. "Archie will see you out." One by one, they left. Judith lingered. "You'll tell my father?" "No," Wolfe said. "You will." She nodded and followed the others into the hallway. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and sighed. "You're satisfied?" I asked. "No, but I am confirmed." "In what?" "That the poison was not meant to kill," he said. "It was meant to warn." I stared. "A warning?" "Yes. And Miss Kilgallen, I suspect, has used such warnings before, but this time she chose the wrong house." The room had gone silent again, the kind of silence Wolfe liked to occupy like a throne. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even open his eyes, and I knew better than to break the spell unless I wanted a lecture on the perils of ill-timed conversation. So I poured him a fresh beer, set it beside his untouched glass, and waited. 3 minutes. Later, he sighed through his nose and reached for the rim. "She is too composed," he murmured finally. "Kilgallen. Her calm is not the kind born of innocence, it's the posture of a tactician." "She almost flinched," I said, "when you mentioned the gloves and the poison." "Almost," he echoed, "and almost matters." I moved back to the red chair. "So you think she did it, but not to kill? Just to rattle Lamont?" "Not Lamont," Wolfe said. "Judith." That earned him a raised eyebrow from me. "She's the one Flora's afraid of?" "No, she's the one Flora is testing, positioning around. See, Archie, women of Miss Kilgallen's persuasion do not act without calculating the benefit. A fatal poisoning would destroy her standing, but a health scare just shy of catastrophe. That could trigger sympathy, urgency, and trust from Harlan," I said. "Especially if his daughter's been barking warnings and suddenly he's on the floor." Wolfe nodded once. "It shifts perception. The accuser becomes hysterical. The manipulator becomes loyal. A subtle realignment. Nice trick. Risky, though. Flora has made risk into a profession, but she's not infallible. I crossed a leg and thought it through. So why stop at a warning? Why not just tighten her grip the old-fashioned way, through charm and late-night chats over brandy?" "She tried," Wolfe said. "But something stalled. Perhaps Judith's persistence, perhaps Harlan's reluctance to adjust his will. Regardless, she escalated. I grunted. "And now we're halfway through a poisoning that no one wants to prosecute." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "if we do not press, Miss Kilgallen will interpret our restraint as incompetence, which invites repetition, so we push." "We push," Wolfe said, ringing for Fritz. He dispatched me that afternoon to follow up on a slim thread, a banker's name mentioned in one of Saul's footnotes. Peter Van Reems had owned property in Westchester, including a modest stone estate leased to a small private museum. That museum's board, I learned, had ties to the Lamonts through a shared charitable trust. Flora had once volunteered there as a liaison, coordinating estate tours and donor events. I brought this to Wolfe at 7:12, interrupting a particularly violent encounter between him and a plate of squab. He set down his knife. "And she used that museum gig to sniff out rich men on the edge of legacy decisions. That's my bet." "It was not a bet, Archie," he said. "It was a pattern. The question is whether Harlan Lamont noticed it in time. He didn't. Then perhaps Judith did." That gave me pause. "You think Judith saw the pattern and baited her?" "Possibly. Then she's not just a nervous daughter, she's a player too." Wolfe's lips curved, not quite a smile. "A less experienced one, but yes. This may be as much a turf war as it is a crime." That night I had dreams involving velvet gloves, poisoned decanters, and a library full of women smiling while they closed doors behind them. I woke up cranky and sore. Wolfe, of course, was refreshed as a sermon on Monday. By 10:30 the next morning, I was back at Lamont's building with a fresh plan. Get FaceTime with the man himself. Enough of proxies and daughters and dinner parties. Harlan Lamont might have been reluctant to get involved, but I was ready to ask him why. The doorman tried to stall me, but Judith had apparently warned her father I might drop in. When I was shown into the sitting room, he stood stiffly, one hand gripping the top of a cane he didn't seem to need. He looked older than the photos, heavier in the brow, thinner in the mouth. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, his voice brittle as if it had been kept in a box too long. "Judith speaks highly of you, or at least tolerably." "I'll take tolerably," I said. "May I sit?" "You may." I sat. He didn't. "I hear you were nearly unseated by a glass of sherry," I said. "Exaggeration. Doctors don't exaggerate symptoms like convulsions and vomiting." He waved a hand. "An unfortunate reaction." "Nothing sinister." I let him stew in that for a moment before adding, "You always pour your own?" "Yes." "And yet someone managed to get something into your bottle." He didn't answer. "Flora Kilgallen." Now he moved. Not much. Just a slight lift of his chin, but it was enough to signal discomfort. "She's been close to you," I said. "She handled your affairs when you were in Portugal last year. She's made suggestions about your foundation, your staff, even your wine cellar." He sat down slowly, as though gravity had finally found him. "She means well. Sometimes people mean well when they rob banks. Doesn't change the result. I don't believe she meant harm." "No, I don't think she did either," I said. "I think she meant to change the weather. It makes you feel vulnerable, make you lean in her direction." His eyes, rimmed red, held mine. "Judith thinks I'm weak." "No, she thinks you're distracted, which is worse." He looked down. Then, after a long pause, he reached into a drawer beside his chair and removed a folded piece of paper. It was crisp, fresh ink, a letter. "She gave this to me after the dinner," he said. "Said it was a statement of intention, that she wanted to be more involved in my legacy." I opened it. Legalese danced across the page, language suggesting co-executor status, a few lines about modernizing trust management. "Did you sign?" "No." "Good," I said, "because if you had, I'd be talking to Judith about funeral arrangements instead of fraud prevention." He actually chuckled. "Not much, but enough to shake the cane a little." "I'll assume you'll let Miss Kilgallen know she's unwelcome," I said. "I'll do more than that." I returned to the brownstone and relayed the story. Wolfe was already ahead of me. She moved too early, he said. She expected either gratitude or pity. Instead, she provoked the daughter, who in turn sought our intervention. A chain of miscalculations, and now. Now we wait for Miss Kilgallen's move. She will not retreat quietly. Retaliation. Possibly. Or an apology so graceful it demands suspicion. He closed his eyes again. Archie, he said, no more interruptions unless the house is on fire. Or someone drinks the wrong brandy. Precisely. It was a grey Thursday morning when the envelope arrived. Pale blue stationery, corner creased, no return address. Fritz found it tucked under the front door like it had been slipped in by someone unwilling to face the bell, which already made it interesting. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, and I had just settled into my second coffee when I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note in deep black ink, looped and stylish. I'd seen the handwriting once before, on the backside of a seating chart left on Harlan Lemont's sideboard. Flora Kilgallen's penmanship was the kind that made you think she could draft poison recipes and wedding invitations with equal flair. The note was brief. Mr. Wolfe, I believe it's time we spoke without intermediaries. You've clearly formed your opinion, and I've allowed that until now. If discretion is still possible, meet me at 11 this morning at Café Voltaire. I'll be in the back corner. Alone. F.K. I read it twice, and then a third time while the coffee cooled. The tone wasn't apologetic. It was precise, rehearsed, and balanced on the edge of something. Not surrender, not panic, but something close to both. When Wolfe descended at 9:45, I handed it to him without a word. He read it, snorted, and passed it back. She has no interest in confession. No, I agreed. She's making a move. She wants to test the temperature. And maybe shift it, he grunted. You'll go. That surprised me. Not you. Archie, he said, sitting and reaching for his beer. If I left this house every time someone wanted to lie to me in public, I'd need to install a revolving door. At 10:55, I was parked in a booth at Café Voltaire, which was too bright for secrets and too expensive for truth. The waitress, bored and indifferent, asked me twice if I wanted a menu, and both times I told her I was waiting for someone with opinions. At 11:06, Flora walked in. Same navy coat, same air of unaffected poise. She removed her gloves, and black this time, and slid into the booth opposite me. I was hoping for Mr. Wolfe, she said. You got me. Buy one Wolfe, get a Goodwin free. She gave a faint smile. You're not as flippant as you pretend. And you're not as sorry as you pretend. Shall we skip the rehearsal and go straight to the script? She folded her hands on the table. Have you ever made a mistake, Mr. Goodwin? Once. I loaned a tie to a reporter from Chicago. I don't mean petty things. I mean real, meaningful, cannot be undone mistakes. I try to avoid those. They tend to come with funerals or subpoenas. She looked away for a moment, then back. I care about Harlan. Truly, I never intended harm, but you managed it anyway. I was trying to protect him. From Judith, from her interference, from her paranoia. That's your angle now. It's the truth. She's never trusted anyone. She makes enemies from shadows. She saw you coming, that's all. She saw someone else coming. Me, she invented it. I leaned back. You poisoned his sherry. Her eyes narrowed. No, she said. I never touched the bottle. But I knew someone had that through me. She saw it. I didn't put anything in the sherry, Mr. Goodwin, but I saw someone near the cabinet before dinner, and I didn't speak up because I thought maybe they were acting on behalf of Judith. Who? She hesitated, just a breath too long. Delholm. That made me laugh. The walking spreadsheet? He wouldn't poison a salad. He's more loyal to Judith than he appears. And he dislikes me. That's not exactly unique. She looked down at her gloves. I should have said something. I didn't. That was my mistake. You're shifting the narrative. No, she said. I'm widening it. We sat in silence for a beat. I watched the steam rise from her untouched tea. She wasn't here to confess. She was here to fracture suspicion, blur the outlines. I suppose, she said, this conversation won't change your mind. It's not my mind that matters. She stood. Tell Mr. Wolfe I was willing to speak plainly, and that some warnings are better left ambiguous. She left before I could reply. I didn't follow. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out. She tried to imply Delholme did it. Quietly, off stage. No direct accusation, just enough smoke to make it interesting. Wolfe grunted, which means she's desperate. She's also clever. She knows we're closer than she prefers. She won't back off. No, but now we know she won't escalate either. I poured him a fresh beer. She didn't expect you to push this far, I said. She figured the health scare would play out. Judith would back down and Harlan would lean her way. But Judith didn't back down. No. And she came to us, which Miss Kilgallen did not anticipate. So what now? We bait her, Wolfe said. That's your idea of strategy? He folded his hands on the desk. She wants control. Legacy, influence. But she also wants her image. Her name. So we offer her one at the cost of the other. You're going to dangle a choice. Exactly. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. By now I'd learned Wolfe's silences were as full as most men's speeches. That night I drafted the letter Wolfe dictated, measured, formal, laced with subtle threat and plausible politeness. It invited Miss Kilgallen back to the brownstone, not for questioning, but for resolution, an opportunity to clarify her position before Mr. Wolfe took further formal or reputational steps. It wasn't a confession trap. It was a line in the sand. We mailed it first thing the next morning. Wolfe sat, eyes closed, listening to Schubert. I wonder, he said softly, how she'll respond when asked to choose between dignity and silence. She'll pick silence. He shook his head. No, he murmured. She'll pick dignity. But she'll try to define it herself. The envelope arrived the next morning, hand-delivered this time by a young man in a beige suit and nerves he couldn't control. He handed it off like it might bite him, muttered something about strict instructions, and disappeared down the steps without waiting for acknowledgement. Wolfe watched from his chair, his fingertips steepled, and waited until I closed the door before he spoke. She has replied. She has, I said, weighing the envelope like it might carry a confession or a counterattack. Want me to read it? Wolfe flicked 2 fingers toward the desk blotter. I slit the flap and unfolded the single page inside. Thick linen stock, the scent of something too expensive for the corner drugstore, and that same clean, looping hand. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for your candor. I will not deny that this situation has reached a point where misunderstanding can no longer serve as a refuge. My role in Mr. Lamont's affairs has always been motivated by concern and respect, however imperfectly expressed. I decline further meetings at this time, and I trust you will respect my position. I do not fear investigation, but I do value discretion. With sincere regards, Flora Kilgallen. I handed it across. Wolfe read it twice, then set it down beside his beer without touching either. She refuses the bait, I said. No, he said softly. She redefines it. That is not retreat. It is posture. She's daring us. She's testing whether we're bluffing. Are we? Wolfe's eyes opened, slow and deliberate. No. I sat, crossed a leg, and tried to find a crack in the chessboard. She's betting we won't press charges. She is correct, Wolfe said. I waited. But, he continued, we are not the only ones with a stake in this game. Judith. She now possesses both motive and momentum. And if we give her the opening, she will act, Wolfe finished. The room quieted again, thick with implication. Outside, Manhattan buzzed along like always. Horns, heels, delivery trucks, oblivious to the psychological warfare unfolding in one quiet brownstone. I rang Judith. She arrived 45 minutes later in a coat that meant business and boots that meant she'd walked with purpose. Fritz offered tea. She declined, and we went straight to Wolfe's office. She refused the meeting, Judith asked, once Wolfe had laid out the note. She did, he replied, which is not the same as declining responsibility. It is a move designed to preserve ambiguity. She wants to walk away clean. She wants the narrative left unwritten, Wolfe said, which is not acceptable. Not to me, it isn't, she snapped. Then I suggest you tell us what you have been holding back. That made her still. Her hands tightened on her lap, then slowly released. I didn't poison the glass, she said. No one has accused you. But she paused. I suspected something. Not just about Flora, about my father. He's been more erratic than usual, forgetful, distracted. He doesn't read the mail he used to. His lawyer called me privately 2 weeks ago, said Flora had asked for copies of his medical directives. Wolfe's eyes flickered. Did he provide them? No, but he asked whether I thought it was appropriate. And what did you say? I said if he gave her one sheet of paper, I'd involve Wolfe. That earned her a glance from the man himself. She was trying to consolidate influence, Judith continued. First emotional, then legal, then medical. And the poisoning, I said, wasn't a mistake. It was an accelerator. A nudge to make the old man more dependent. Exactly, she said. But it failed. It made him paranoid instead of pliant. And then I saw my chance to call us in, to draw her out. Wolfe nodded once, almost imperceptibly. You're not wrong in strategy. But you are young in its execution, then finish it for me. Wolfe leaned back. Miss Kilgallen, he said, is not a criminal in the conventional sense. She's a strategist. Her crimes are psychological, but that does not make them harmless. So what do? We isolate her. Not through the law, but through leverage. I looked at him. Whose leverage? Mr. Lamont's. He must cut her off. He won't believe it, Judith said bitterly. He still wants to. Then, Wolfe said, we show him something he cannot ignore. It came together quickly after that. I spent the next few hours assembling the pieces Wolfe laid out. Phone records Saul dug up, a timeline cross-referenced with the probate filings from Van Riem's case, and a polite but firm summary letter drafted for Harlan Lamont's eyes only. Wolfe wrote it himself, handwritten, which was rare, and sealed it in an envelope with his private wax seal, which was rarer. At 4 o'clock sharp, Judith delivered it herself. By 5:30, she called back. He read it, and he asked me to pour out every bottle in the cabinet. Then he called the building manager and revoked Flora's elevator privileges. Wolfe closed his eyes. And? He asked again. He said I should stay for dinner. That, Wolfe murmured, is the first true move in weeks. I hung up the receiver. Wolfe leaned back, hands resting like sleeping animals on the arms of his chair. So that's it? I asked. The velvet glove gets peeled back and everyone goes back to soup? No, he said. She will find another house. You don't seem bothered. She's been disarmed. The next man she meets won't be Harlan Lamont, and she will not risk another mistake so soon. He closed his eyes again. She found the line, he said, and she didn't cross it. But she came close enough to lose the game. I nodded. Then I reached for my notepad, because I had a hunch we weren't done yet, and I was right. It was the kind of call that doesn't wait for your second cup of coffee. At precisely 7:41 the next morning, the phone rang. Not the line people use for delivery mistakes or orchid questions, but the one Wolfe reserves for business he considers too important for distractions. I picked it up out of reflex and habit, halfway into my bathrobe and nowhere near caffeinated. "Mr. Goodwin." The voice was a low baritone, careful but strained, like a man rehearsing strength. "This is Harlan Lamont." That got my attention. I straightened in the chair and waved Fritz off with a hand. "Good morning, Mr. Lamont. I'm calling because I want to ask a question that might sound ridiculous. If you've heard the things I hear in a week, I doubt it'll even break the top 10. There was a pause, and then, Did Mr. Wolfe ask anyone to follow me yesterday?" "No, sir. Not unless you went by the name Saul Panzer, and I'd be shocked if you did." "I see." Another pause. "Then someone else did." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Go on." After I dismissed Miss Kilgallen's involvement, I spent most of the afternoon at my club. Quiet, uneventful. But around 4, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. Bald, heavy coat, standing at the newsstand near the lounge, not reading anything. "I've been going to that club for 30 years. Mr. Goodwin, I know the rhythm of the place." "This man was watching, you're sure?" I made a point to step past him. He turned his head when I did, not casually. Intentional. I went back inside. When I came out, he was gone. "Any other contact?" "No, but something about it didn't sit right. I understand." "And you're sure Miss Kilgallen's no longer in contact?" "She left a voicemail last night. Polite. Said she respected my boundaries and hoped to see me again under better circumstances. That she was returning to Connecticut. And you believe her?" "I believe she's clever," he said, "but not clever enough to fool me anymore." We hung up. I went straight to Wolfe with the news. He was seated in his chair already, beer in hand, listening to a Baroque sonata that sounded like a debate between violins. He didn't open his eyes as I relayed the call. "I didn't authorize surveillance," I finished. "And Saul swears he's home cataloging a set of court depositions for another client. Then someone else is watching Mr. Lamont. And if it's not us, and it's not Miss Kilgallen..." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Then we ask who benefits from her absence." That narrowed the circle. We had 4 central players left: Judith, Delholme, Emery Bain, and possibly someone from the periphery we hadn't seen yet. But only 2 had the means and motivation to keep watching Lamont after Flora had been cut loose. Judith had already shown her cards, and she'd played them with Wolfe's blessing. She had no need for shadows now. Delholme lacked initiative. That left Bain. "Want me to pay him a visit?" I asked. Wolfe nodded once. "With precision." "Ask politely." Observe ruthlessly. I found Emery Bain at his office, immaculately dressed and half buried in a portfolio marked Lemont Holdings, red lines. He smiled the way men do when they think they still have a role to play. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, standing, "did we find a second bottle of poison? Or just a new suspect to irritate?" "I'm here on a different matter," I said, sitting without invitation. "Mr. Lamont noticed someone tailing him yesterday." His smile froze. "Strange," he said. "That sort of thing usually happens in books." "You're in one," I said. "Now answer the question." "I have no interest in following anyone. But you do have an interest in Harlan Lamont's money. And if Flora Kilgallen's been moved off the board, you might think you're back in play." He reached for a glass of water. "You're barking up the wrong portfolio." "Where were you yesterday afternoon between 3 and 5? "Meeting a client in Midtown. You're welcome to call him. He'll confirm." "I'll do that." I stood. "Mr. Bain," I added, pausing at the door. "If you've got ambitions left, don't mistake Wolfe's silence for surrender. He's simply waiting for the last stone to fall." Back at the brownstone, I confirmed the alibi. Bain had been at the Schuyler Club with a trust officer from Norbridge and Bell. No slippage. That meant one of 2 things. Lamont had been mistaken, or someone else entirely had entered the picture. But Wolfe was already ahead of me. Again. He summoned me to the office at 4:10. "I've received a second call," he said, "from Lorna." The housekeeper. She claims someone left a package outside her apartment door. No name, no postage. A small brown box with no writing. Did she open it? She did. It contained a broken wristwatch and a single white glove. I blinked. What kind of message is that? A crude one, Wolfe said, but effective. Do you think it's from Flora? No. It lacks her finesse. Then who? Someone is trying to suggest that Miss Kilgallen left more than hurt feelings behind. That she has enemies. Or accomplices, I frowned. But why intimidate the housekeeper? She's harmless. She's also forgetful, which makes her a liability. Someone thinks she may remember more than she did the first time that made me sit forward. Wolfe, are we looking at a second player? Possibly, he said. Or a reaction. Someone rattled by Flora's failure, acting on impulse, which means our mystery is not over. The next morning I confirmed it. Judith called again. Someone went through my desk, she said. When? Last night. I keep notes there. Records from before I contacted you. Timelines, letters. A few have been moved, you're sure. I never misplace paper. I relayed this to Wolfe, who didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood, a rare event when he hadn't finished his breakfast. We have reached the part of the game, he said slowly, where fear replaces strategy. That is when people make mistakes. He turned toward the window, then back again. We must force a hand. Not Flora's. The one behind her, and how do we do that? We provoke, Wolfe said with a rare gleam in his eye. Gently, but unmistakably, by doing what? By announcing that we have evidence we do not possess. Yet, and you want me to make the call? I want you, he said, to write the lie with just enough truth to make it fatal. Wolfe had that look again, the one that made you feel like the room wasn't quite big enough for both him and the strategy unfolding behind his eyes. He'd just handed me a page he'd dictated, a note to be sent discreetly to each of the 4 remaining figures in this ever-thickening pie. Judith Lamont, Lawrence Delholme, Emery Bain, and yes, Flora Kilgallen. The contents weren't explosive. That was the trick, just enough heat to crack the shell. To whom it may concern, Mr. Wolfe wishes to inform you that a new document, recently recovered from a private source, contains material evidence related to the incident involving Mr. Harlan Lamont. You may wish to review your position and act accordingly before a formal statement is made. This is not a threat. It is a courtesy. A G. I hand-delivered the notes myself, just to watch the reactions. Judith was the first. She opened it while standing in her foyer under a portrait of her mother that stared like it had been painted for guilt alone. Her lips barely moved as she read it. What did you find? She asked. Nothing yet, I said. That's the point. To her credit, she didn't press. Do I have time to prepare a reply? You just did, I said, and left before she could adjust the expression that flickered across her face. Something between worry and satisfaction. Delholme received his copy as if it were a tax notice. He didn't open it right away. Should I be concerned? He asked, adjusting his glasses. I don't know, I said. Should you? He nodded once. Noted. At Emery Bain's office, the reaction was more theatrical. He read it, smiled, and then folded the page like he was tucking away a party invitation. Wolfe really does enjoy his little mind games, he said. I hope someone's keeping score. Only when it counts, I said. I saved Flora for last. She was staying at a mid-range hotel in Gramercy Park under a name that wasn't hers, but sounded enough like a failed actress to not raise suspicion. I knocked at 3:15 p.m. She opened the door halfway and accepted the envelope without a word. Her eyes, lined but alert, darted across my face like she was already calculating how many lies she'd need to tell that day. She didn't open the letter then. She simply said, "Thank you," in a voice that held no gratitude. By 5:45, The trap had started to tremble. The first tremor came in the form of a voicemail from Delholme. Wolfe listened to it while sipping his beer and arching an eyebrow. "Mr. Wolfe, I believe I know what you've discovered. If you need a timeline or specifics, I'm available. I've been reluctant, but not dishonest. There's a difference." Next came a call from Emery Bain's assistant, asking politely whether Wolfe might be willing to revisit any conclusions based on the new material, should it involve Mr. Bain's prior recommendations regarding the Lamont estate. And then, just before dinner, Fritz handed Wolfe a sealed envelope that had been couriered directly. Wolfe opened it with a slow precision that made me itch, then handed it to me without a word. It was from Flora. "Mr. Wolfe, I had hoped this matter was over. Apparently, it is not. Since you claim to have discovered new information, I will clarify the only detail I ever concealed. I did not put anything in the sherry bottle, but I did know it had been tampered with before the dinner began. Someone, likely Delholme, was in the cabinet earlier that day. I chose not to say anything because I feared it would reflect on me. That was cowardice, not guilt. You have won your victory. Congratulations. I am returning to Hartford. I trust you will choose not to damage what little remains of my reputation. F.K. I set the page down slowly. Well, that's a lot of words to avoid saying sorry. She's not sorry, Wolfe said. She's managing. And Delholme? He's preparing for the fall. Likely not the culprit, but afraid he'll be seen as complicit. Then who is? Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he rang for Fritz and asked for Judith to be called, politely, firmly, and with an air of finality. He wanted her at the brownstone that evening. Alone. She arrived at 7:22, a little late, a little tense. Wolfe was already seated, his beer poured, the lighting low enough to make the room feel like a den of verdicts. "I assume you've read my note," Wolfe began. "I have." "And?" She sat down, folded her hands, and looked him dead in the eye. "I destroyed the records," she said. That made me stiffen, but Wolfe remained still. "What records?" "My notes. The early ones. About Flora. About what I suspected. I thought if I made a formal report, it might compromise your investigation, so I burned them." Wolfe's eyes narrowed just slightly. "And the bottle?" "I didn't touch it." I swear he nodded once. "I believe you." She blinked. "You do? You're too methodical to risk contamination, but you're also too thorough to be unaware of everything that passed through that house." He tapped the edge of his chair. "You've given me motive, insight, and context. But you've also given me silence. Just enough of it to keep this dance going." Judith leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, I need this to end. It's about to," he said. And with that, he rang the bell. I opened the door 10 minutes later to find Saul Panzer standing on the porch with a small cardboard box in his hands. He passed it to me, nodded once, and vanished into the night, like a man who didn't need credit to know he was indispensable. I brought the box in and handed it to Wolfe. "Miss Lamont," he said, "in this box is a pair of velvet gloves. Cleaned, carefully stored, and tested, and she didn't move. There are traces," he said, "of ammonium phosphate and of the particular oil used to polish your father's liquor cabinet. That oil was applied after you dismissed the housekeeper for the day." Her mouth opened, then closed. "You touched the bottle," Wolfe said, "perhaps only to inspect, perhaps to reposition it. But you did touch it." "No," she whispered. You wore the gloves," he continued, "to avoid suspicion. But gloves preserve more than prints. They preserve timelines." She stared at him, then at me, then away. "I thought she'd already done it," she said. "You were confirming," Wolfe said, "some not committing." She nodded, slowly. "I wanted proof." "That's all. You found it," he said softly. "And in doing so, left your own trail." Judith stood. "Will you report it?" "No," Wolfe said. "Because you did not poison your father." But you did compromise the investigation. I wanted to protect him. As did Miss Kilgallen. You simply did it more cleanly. She said nothing. She didn't thank him. And she left without another word. Wolfe looked at me. It was the kind of quiet that only comes after storms. Measured, deliberate, and waiting for someone to say the one thing everyone already knew. Judith Lamont had walked out of the brownstone with her coat too neatly folded over one arm and her conscience not quite intact. Wolfe hadn't moved. He hadn't even sipped his beer. He sat in silence, which in Wolfe terms meant he was savoring the conclusion as much as the process. I set the box of gloves on the shelf next to the one that held the clock from the Anselmo case and the lacquered fan from Kyoto. "Well," I said, "that was one hell of a ballet." Wolfe didn't answer. Not at first. When he did, it came out like the end of a thought he'd been rehearsing internally for hours. She touched the bottle, Archie, but only to see what had already been done. That makes her complicit, but not guilty. I know, I said, but that's a line most juries wouldn't care to distinguish. Fortunately, he said, I do not work for juries. I let that sit for a moment before asking the obvious. So what happens now? Nothing, Wolfe said. Mr. Lamont has been informed. He knows who tried to use him. He knows who tried to protect him. He will decide whether that balance tilts toward estrangement or forgiveness. And Miss Kilgallen? She will not return, Wolfe said flatly. She has been removed from proximity. Her reputation has suffered, but not publicly. That was her price for silence. And Delholme. Shaken, but intact. Bain? Still smiling, Wolfe muttered, but more cautiously now. I sat down, finally. The chair creaked under me like it was sighing with relief. It's strange, I said. We had a poisoned drink, a hidden bottle, 3 suspects, a family feud, and no one ends up in handcuffs. That is not strange, Wolfe said. It is human. The motive was never murder. It was control. Murder is loud. Control is quiet. And the victim? Recovered. Wiser. And perhaps for the first time in his life. Truly alone. He leaned back. There is dignity in that. I didn't argue. Wolfe doesn't wax philosophical often. But when he does, it's usually right before dessert. Dinner that night was roast squab in a reduction Fritz wouldn't explain and a celery root puree that could have won awards. Wolfe ate like a man who had restored balance to the world, and I drank like a man who was still trying to figure out which move tipped the scales. Afterward, I sat in the office with the lights low and the windows open. Spring was threatening to arrive early that year, and the air smelled like possibility wrapped in caution. Wolfe stayed silent until Fritz brought in the coffee. I wonder, he said finally, whether Miss Lamont will ever understand that her silence was the only truly selfish act in the entire affair. She'll rationalize it, I said. Most people do. She was not wrong to want proof, but she was wrong to seek it through concealment. She didn't want Wolfe. She wanted certainty. And what she got, he said, was me. I grinned. There are worse things to get. That, Wolfe murmured, is debatable. The case file, such as it was, remained thin. No arrests, no formal charges. Just a trail of fractured trust and one carefully folded letter placed among Wolfe's private papers. Days passed. A week. Spring arrived. I got a postcard from Saul. Something about a job in Albany and a particularly boring accountant with something to hide. And then, just as things began to feel resolved, a small box arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single orchid, wilted but unmistakably rare, and a handwritten card. For your collection. A gesture of closure. F.K. Wolfe read it, said nothing, and placed the orchid in the greenhouse with a delicacy that startled even me. She still plays her cards well, I said. No, Wolfe said. She plays them too late. I let it drop. The brownstone settled back into its rhythm, Beer at 11. Orchids at 4. I'm chasing bills and suspects and an ongoing argument with the typewriter. But sometimes, late at night, I'd look at that glove on the shelf, the one she wore to test her father's drink, and think about how many people got close to guilt without falling into it. How many people stood on the edge and decided to lean back instead of forward. And I'd think about Nero Wolfe, rooted, unmoving, but with the reach of a man who never needed to leave his chair to pull the truth from someone's throat. Some detectives solve murders. Wolfe solves people. And in this case, that made all the difference.